Hello everyone and good evening. My name's Don Arleth and you're watching World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw. President Zelenskyy talks to Donald Trump and European leaders in an effort to rally support around protecting critical infrastructure from Russian attacks. There's still no final decision by the White House to send long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles to Kyiv, but there still is a lot of hope. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Poland's conservative opposition marches against immigration and the EU-Mercosur deal. France's Macron names Sébastien Lecornu Prime Minister again. And unusual low tide in the Baltic Sea reveals hidden shipwreck. As winter draws near, Russia intensifies strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, leaving millions without power or running water. After a phone call, President Zelenskyy says he secured support from Donald Trump, who signaled a possible shift in policy by potentially backing the delivery of long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles. With air defenses strained and critical infrastructure under threat, Ukraine is racing to secure new guarantees from its allies. Anastasia Yanchenko reports.
Following recent blackouts in Ukraine caused by Russian strikes on critical energy infrastructure, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy held a phone call with his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump.
I informed President Trump about Russia's attacks on our energy system, and I appreciate his willingness to support it. We discussed opportunities to bolster our air defense, as well as concrete agreements that we are working on to ensure this. There are good options and solid ideas on how to truly strengthen us.
The conversation also follows Trump's latest statement on the delivery of Tomahawk missiles, seen as confirmation of his policy shift towards Ukraine, a move long awaited by Ukrainians and feared by Russia.
Yeah, I've sort of made a decision, pretty much, if you consider. I think I want to find out what they're doing with them. Yes. Where are they sending them, I guess? I'd have to ask that question.
As winter approaches, Moscow's forces have once again struck Ukraine's energy infrastructure, increasing pressure on the power grid. Over the past 48 hours, these attacks have cut off users from both electricity and water across several regions, including the capital, Kyiv.
Try to imagine 2 million people living in the capital of the European country, didn't have something very simple like electricity. We couldn't wash, we couldn't take a shower.
Kyiv says Moscow has deliberately waited for declining weather conditions, which reduce the efficiency of Ukraine's air defenses by 20 to 30%.
Over the past month, the enemy has increased the number of air attack weapons used 1.3 times, although our air defense demonstrates an effectiveness of around 74%.
On Friday, Zelenskyy held phone calls with European leaders, including German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and Finnish President Alexander Stubb to arrange a meeting of the coalition of the willing and discuss security guarantees for critical infrastructure, which could be implemented this month.
I've been informed that we need to protect 203 key facilities with air defense systems. There are many more beyond that, but these are the ones flagged by Energy, Gas and Water Infrastructure Management.
As Ukraine battles attacks against its energy infrastructure, America's First Lady Melania Trump issued a statement announcing that few Ukrainian children displaced by the war had been reunited with their families.
In fact, 8 children have been rejoined with their families during the past 24 hours.
The First Lady had a letter hand-delivered to President Putin by her husband regarding the fate of Ukrainian children held captive by Moscow during the Trump-Putin-Alaska summit in August.
He responded in writing, signaling a willingness to engage with me directly and outlining details regarding the Ukrainian children residing in Russia. President Putin and I have had an open channel of communication regarding the welfare of these children.
Estimates say around 20,000 Ukrainian children have been deported or forcibly transferred to Russian territory, but Kyiv says the numbers are likely higher. For TVP World, Anastasia Yanchenko.
boosting the European defense sector, cooperation with Ukraine, and addressing Russian provocations more effectively. These are just some of the topics on the agenda for the annual NATO Parliamentary Assembly currently underway in Ljubjana. The meeting comes as NATO is heavily focused on countering the Kremlin's attempts to probe the alliance's air defense. Our defense correspondent Zuzanna Jurek reports.
The United Kingdom's Royal Air Force carried out surveillance missions along NATO's Russia land borders on Saturday. This comes as part of the broader initiative, the Eastern Sentry, which comes in response to the ongoing Russia's provocations against NATO member states. The mission was initiated in mid-September following a number of incursions, whether it be by drones or fighter jets, into NATO's eastern flank's airspaces.
Russia is intensifying some of its attempts to test the alliance and to see if there are any weak spots, if there are any delays in response. I would say that until now, NATO has responded effectively in different ways, both by shooting down some of the drones in Poland and also by escorting out the planes out of Estonian airspace. But of course, we also know that NATO needs 5 times more air and missile defense capabilities.
British latest surveillance mission comes just as NATO member states parliamentarians have gathered in the Slovenian capital of Ljubljana for the annual NATO Parliamentary Assembly. They are set to discuss the ongoing as well as emerging challenges to the alliance and its unity, including the US Global Posture Review, which distributes and is responsible for the distribution of the US's military footprint globally. Rumors have emerged about the potential withdrawing of some of the US support from Europe, and to that end, Keir Giles from Chatham House has said that Europe must do more in order to bolster and take greater sovereignty over its own defences.
There are countries in Europe that have taken an interest in defense of themselves, whether it's conventional defense, total defense, societal defense, all of the different things that they need to do to survive when Russia is doing its best to prevent them. And there are other countries which have taken much less of an interest. It is the countries west of Warsaw that have not taken sufficient interest in their own defense and protection, and therefore are proving a weak link in the defense of Europe as a whole.
These new and ongoing challenges, as well as how to implement the goals established during the Hague summit back in June, are all set to dominate the agenda. This includes the strengthening of the military-industrial base in Europe, and this will also include Ukraine's cooperation as an ally. Now, these conversations will culminate during the plenary session on Monday, which, amongst others, will be attended by the Secretary-General Mark Rutte, when the NATO allies will vote on passing their new resolution. From Ljubljana for TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Poland's conservative opposition party, Law and Justice, staged a protest in Warsaw on Saturday against EU migration policies and the Mercosur trade deal, accusing the government of betraying national and agricultural interests. To take the sting out of the protests, Prime Minister Donald Tusk claimed that Poland clinched an agreement with the European Commission securing Poland's exclusion from the EU's migration pact. He also vowed to defend farmers against unfair competition. Gabriela Jalonek has the details.
Poland's largest opposition party, Law and Justice, held an anti-immigration and anti-government demonstration this Saturday in Warsaw. The event began after 2 p.m. local time and lasted approximately 2.5 hours. An estimated 10,000 to 15,000 people gathered during the demonstration at Castle Square. Protesters voiced opposition against the EU's migration pact, which enters into force next year. Prime Minister Donald Tusk assured on social media platform X that Poland will be excluded from the pact.
I said there would be no relocation of migrants in Poland, and there won't be. It's settled. I said we would tighten security on the border with Belarus, and it is currently the most secure border in Europe. I said we would tighten visa and asylum regulations, and Poland has become a role model for others. We're doing it, not just talking about it.
EU officials have not yet confirmed that Poland would be treated differently. However, in February, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that EU would take into account the extraordinary solidarity Poland has shown toward Ukrainian refugees when it implements the migration pact. The EU Migration Pact includes mandatory solidarity measures regarding issues like relocation of migrants within EU countries, faster border procedures and stronger external border controls to balance responsibility among member states. Countries where migrants first arrive will now be able to relocate a total up to 30,000 migrants per year to other EU member states. The alternative is for those countries to pay a 20,000 euro contribution for each person they refuse to receive. The protesters also included Polish farmers who, together with right-wing politicians and sympathizers, came to protest against the Mercosur agreement intended to facilitate the import of certain agricultural products from Latin America to EU countries.
It will, we can say will, kill our farmers and our agriculture.
Mainly plant and animal production, especially where vegetables are concerned. The situation in Polish farming is now at a breaking point.
To keep that unity.
In September, the European Commission submitted the agreement for ratification to the European Council. The European Parliament also has to approve the deal.
The vote is open.
However, it remains uncertain whether the final step for the EU to conclude the agreement will go ahead smoothly. The deal, which liberalizes trade between Mercosur countries, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay and Uruguay, and the EU, reduces tariffs on many products, including some agricultural goods, raising concerns among European farmers about facing unfair competition from Latin American producers. Recently, some Polish farmers organized self-harvest giveaways of their plums and peppers because the cost of harvesting them would have exceeded their profits.
The problems with the peppers and the plums is not about Mercosur. It's about the distribution chains in Europe where the farmers are getting paid very little for their produce, which is then being sold expensively by the distribution chain.
Supporters of the Mercosur deal argue it's necessary to successfully face Chinese competition and diversify trading partners in the changing global trade environment.
Poland will oppose Mercosur. We want to at least demonstrate that we will not back down when it comes to the interests of Polish agricultural producers.
But the deal's opponents fear Mercosur countries will not comply with European phytosanitary and environmental standards, and as a result, will be able to sell cheaper but lower quality food products. The plenary vote on the Mercosur agreement itself has not yet been scheduled. According to the European Parliament, it could appear on the MEP's agenda by the end of the year. For TVP World, Gabriela Jelonek.
In a stunning reversal, French President Emmanuel Macron has reappointed Sébastien Lecornu as Prime Minister, just days after Lecornu resigned amid fierce political backlash. The move comes as France grapples with deepening political instability following a snap election that left no party with a majority. Lecornu now faces an urgent task of forming a government and passing a critical year-end budget. But opposition leaders are furious, calling for Macron's resignation and the dissolution of the National Assembly. Gabriela Freshnak takes us inside this political fiasco in this next report.
All eyes were on the Élysée Palace on Friday, where French President Emmanuel Macron met with representatives of the country's major political parties to discuss the appointment of a new prime minister. A few hours later, Macron reappointed Sébastien Lecornu, much to the surprise of the public and political commentators alike. Lecornu accepted, but merely out of duty, as he explained in a post on X.
I have no other ambition than to get out of this situation, which is objectively very difficult for everyone.
Lecornu's reappointment was met with a less than enthusiastic reaction on the streets of Paris.
I think it will be the same thing all over again. As long as we don't change the formula and we don't go back to the ballot box, I think things will still get stuck each time.
I'm completely lost. I don't know what they want to do. There's no program, there's nothing.
I think if he's left, he's left. It doesn't make a difference if he comes back, he's already toasted.
Experts agree that Lecornu's reappointment likely won't solve the ongoing political crisis. Lecornu's first cabinet was dissolved before it even convened for the first time, after his choice of ministers angered both sides of the political spectrum. with some calling the appointees too right-leaning, while others deemed them not right-wing enough.
He was facing a lot of parliamentarian opposition, mainly from the far right and the left right, who were the big winners of the previous election, where the center only managed to have enough votes to create a coalition.
The central bloc is incapacity to make compromise, but the problem comes from the fact that even inside the majority bloc, the centrist bloc, President Macron's party, the 20 Forces and the Republican, they were not agreeing on the strategy to fulfill. And that is why Sébastien Lecornu did not manage even to have his government present and to start working.
French politics has become increasingly unstable since Macron's re-election in 2022. As no party holds a parliamentary majority. Macron's decision to call a snap parliamentary election last year only deepened the crisis, resulting in an even more fragmented parliament. For TVP World, Gabriela Fesnak.
In Gaza, families are returning to the ruins of their homes after a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas took hold, carrying grief, hope, and uncertainty. With nearly 90% of homes damaged and loved ones lost, many wonder if this is really peace or just another pause in the cycle of devastation. Filip Novitsky has more.
They return step by step to the streets they once called home. In Gaza, Palestinians are coming back after the guns fell silent, unsure of what they will find or who might still be there.
We're heading to Gaza to see the situation there, just like everyone else. We are very happy. Allahu Akbar. God willing, we will pray at Al-Aqsa one day.
We thank God that the bloodshed has stopped, even if the pain will grow stronger, because when we return to Gaza, we won't find our families who became martyrs. I lost my brother, his son, my sister's husband, and other relatives.
After the US-brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hamas took hold, thousands of Palestinians began moving north from their temporary shelters, carrying what little they had, returning to homes that may no longer exist. According to the United Nations, around 90% of homes in Gaza have been damaged during the war.
We found the place completely destroyed. All the houses and tents were destroyed. Even now, they are pulling out mortars.
There is a sense of relief, but also fear of what comes next. As leaders across the world react to the fragile truce, European Parliament President Roberta Metsola offered a message of hope and call for lasting change.
This is a moment for peace and renewal in the Middle East. It opens a path that could finally end the intergenerational cycle of violence, of suffering and terror that has plagued the region. It must be respected and it must be thoroughly implemented.
For those returning home, the ceasefire is a moment to breathe a sigh of relief, but also to wonder whether this is truly the end.
Low water levels off Poland's coast have exposed a long-lost shipwreck, just one of an estimated 100,000 vessels resting beneath the Baltic Sea. Though only a fraction have been explored, each discovery adds a new chapter to the region's maritime history. From professional archaeologists to adventurous hobbyists, the Baltic seabed continues to amaze. From ancient shipwrecks to 150-year-old bottles of champagne. Natalia Komarov takes us into a deep dive in the Baltic's mysterious waters in this next report.
What secrets lie at the bottom of the Baltic Sea? What treasures hide underwater amid long-forgotten merchant ships and destroyed German submarines? Just this week, a century-old shipwreck revealed itself near the seaside town of Krynica Morska due to unusually low water levels. An impressive 30-meter-long cutter with no clear backstory. There are an estimated 100,000 shipwrecks buried on the Baltic seabed, with around 2,000 along the Polish coastline. Some of the most impressive finds are on display at the National Maritime Museum in Gdańsk. Like this 1,000-year-old ship, which resembles a Viking vessel but was constructed locally.
There is a big medieval harbor in Putsk, now underwater, holding 5 ships. The 5th one has just been excavated.
Most shipwrecks are left underwater, like Leopold, an early 20th century merchant ship still buried under layers of sand.
This is the core of Poland's early small merchant fleet, dating from the period soon after the country regained independence following the First World War. We knew that Leopold sunk in 1926, but until 2020, we didn't know where.
The museum has been deploying divers on research missions for 55 years. So far, over 30 shipwrecks were thoroughly searched.
We have exhibits which can surprise an average visitor. For example, an 18th century barrel of butter.
Underwater archaeology can also be a fun hobby. Baltic Tech is a group of enthusiasts who dive in search of seabed treasures. Their greatest find, a few bottles of 19th century champagne. After tasting the effervescent drink, the hobbyists took the remaining bottles to the headquarters of its producer, Louis Roderet. You can learn more about Baltic Tech's adventures at tvpworld.com. But if you're dreaming of donning a wetsuit to become underwater Indiana Jones, remember, a permit is needed to extract anything you find down there.
Theft happens, but it is very stigmatized. It's not like in the old days when people acted like it didn't concern them.
Most divers choose more pleasant seas for their adventures. The capricious Baltic weather makes it difficult to plan an expedition in advance. And yet, that's precisely why so many undiscovered gems still wait to be found. Be careful though, it's not always champagne. Sometimes it's a bomb. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
After mass attacks on Ukraine, millions have been left in the dark and without running water. Russia is once again hoping to plunge Ukrainians into the cold this winter as it ramps up attacks on critical civilian infrastructure. However, Ukraine is fighting back and striking key Russian oil refineries far away from Ukraine's borders. The country is just beginning to deploy its homemade Flamingo long-range missiles, and there's talk about the Trump administration transferring Tomahawk cruise missiles. And now joining me to discuss this and other issues is Alberto Arcol, professor of law at DePaul University. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Good evening. I'm delighted to be with you.
Yes, now let's go ahead and start with those Tomahawks. Trump said that he thinks he has made a decision to sell NATO Tomahawks, allowing them to transfer the long-range missiles to Ukraine. Now, is this still somewhat Trump's way to send a signal to Vladimir Putin, giving him perhaps another chance to engage in some kind of peace negotiations?
No, absolutely. I think that Trump has come to the conclusion that, at least for now, Putin is not interested in serious negotiations. So from Trump's perspective, the best way to go, and this is what advisors like Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, are saying to him, is to put more pressure on Russia. How do you do that? Well, you sell weapons to NATO, which NATO then transfers to Ukraine. It's a win-win for America. As you know, the president loves to sell weapons, loves to sell American products to other countries, paid for by NATO members. And then Ukraine will have these new capabilities. And of course, it will have the go-ahead to use them as it sees fit. The Ukrainians have been quite clear that they're not interested in striking population centers with these weapons. And indeed, they have not done so. They want to hit Russian oil refineries, arms depots, factories that make various critical military components for their weapons. So this is probably what we're going to see over the next few weeks playing out.
Now, if those missiles do indeed make it to Kyiv, the U.S. will still be in charge of what targets they do strike. What do you think would be acceptable, and where do you think the red line would be for the United States?
Yeah, so as long as, and in fact, Trump has said so openly in some of his social media posts, in his Truth Social media posts, that he thinks Ukraine should start striking deep into Russian lines. That does not mean population centers. And again, Ukraine is not interested in hitting Russian population centers. So what would that mean? Well, Russian oil refineries, I think, are fair game. Factories that produce Russian drones, factories that produce Russian components for their air force, factories that produce different types of other weapons with which Russia is right now attacking Ukraine. All of that would be on the table.
Now, what role do you think that the coalition of the willing can play in securing Ukraine's critical infrastructure, as there was just talk about that with President Zelenskyy, and how might coordination with European leaders evolve in this sense in the coming months?
I think Ukraine desperately needs air defenses. It has needed air defenses from day one, over 3 years ago. And Europe's challenge has been to develop a sense of urgency and also to restart its defense industrial base so that it can produce enough air defense weapons to pass on to Ukraine. Denmark, for example, has been one of the leaders in making this move. A small country, but it has very, very impressive capabilities militarily. So I think what you're going to see is increasing European urgency to transfer more and more air defense systems. I'm talking not just about Patriots, but about other kinds of anti-air missiles that can be quite useful to the Ukrainians. But it's a sense you need more numbers. You need lots of numbers and you need larger volumes. And this is why Europe is finally come to the awareness that it needs to awaken that military industrial base that Europe allowed to go to sleep, so to speak, for 30 years following the end of the Cold War.
Yes, now I'd like to switch gears a little bit. How do you see the hybrid war with Russia evolving? Now, NATO's, air patrols are more numerous, they're more frequent after these airspace violations. Where do you think we go next in terms of what we've been seeing along NATO's eastern flank?
Interestingly, Trump also a couple of weeks ago said that the Europeans should start shooting down any Russian warplanes that intrude into European airspace. I think Europe is going to be a bit cautious about that, but certainly there's going to come a point at which if the Russians continue doing what they have been doing over the past few weeks, Europeans are going to NATO is going to become more aggressive about, first of all, shooting down drones much earlier, and then eventually, if Russian overflights become a serious issue, there are going to be multiple warnings again. And then at some point, one Russian airplane, clearly on European airspace is going to have to be shut down for the Russians to get the message. I hope it doesn't come to that, but it may well come. Putin is a master at just testing his adversaries' will, seriousness to use power, just right up to the point of avoiding an all-out conflict. And so I think at some point Europe needs to show that it's very, very serious. I'm sure Europeans have conveyed this to Russia repeatedly over the past few weeks, but there may have to be some action, limited action, but nevertheless forceful action to get the Russians to understand that what they're doing is unacceptable.
Indeed. Now, there's also this increased competition in the Arctic. At the White House, Finnish President Alexander Stubb signed a memorandum of understanding with President Trump for the U.S. to acquire 11 icebreakers, but for the Arctic, four of them will be from Finnish shipyards. How do you think the competition... Yeah, it is. Well, especially because the United States doesn't really operate any. But how do you think the competition in the Arctic with the Arctic powers and even China, how is this likely to evolve?
Again, finally, the United States as well as Europe have awakened to the fact that we need to get serious about Arctic security. The purchase of these icebreakers from Finland is a magnificent thing in terms of strengthening the alliance, the NATO alliance. It shows that the United States is prepared to buy European technology, if need be, to strengthen Arctic security. But also, the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, just announced an 8.7 billion euro package for Greenland security. And this is very significant because it involves Denmark buying an additional number of F-35 planes from the United States, and also Denmark creating a Greenland Security Arctic Command and increasing Danish patrol vessels as well as maritime vessels to increase their capacity to surveil what is happening in the Arctic waters near Greenland. Greenland is key to Arctic security, and Denmark is showing that it is very serious, both through the purchase of these weapons and also by deploying military forces, which it will do soon, to Greenland, to be part of this link, okay, in the chain of increasing Arctic security. So these are all very, very positive steps, and I think it will get the Russians' attention.
All right. Alberto Coll, professor of law at DePaul University, thank you so much for your insights in this interesting conversation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.